Hey, fellow readers, thank you for attending tonight. I will tell you what, we are in for a treat. The two gentlemen that I have joining me tonight, Brian and Jeff from Andrews and Wilson, and their new book, Dark Intercept. If you haven't read it yet, put it on your TBR pile, and let me tell you, don't read it in the dark. That's the one thing I got to say for you. It is action adventure. They have come from their own experiences of being in the military, and they have a list of things they've done. Hopefully they'll be able to share them with us tonight. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with them, and they will be joining us shortly. And so I can tell you, I told one of them that I was going to read the back flap, and you know what? You got their series are the Shepherd series, which this one is book number 1 of, and they can't write book number 2 quick enough for me. Tier 1, The Sons of Valor, and then Rogue Asset, which is the 9th book of the Webb Griffin Presidential Agent series. So they write what they know, and I will tell you, it comes out very clearly while you're reading it. Fast pace, excitement. I hesitate to say this because I don't want to scare anybody away, but the body count, but that's that type of book. So Jeff and Brian will be joining us shortly, hopefully in the next couple seconds. And they will let us all know about writing of their books. So thank you for joining us tonight, gentlemen.
Chris, thanks so much for having us. We sure appreciate it. Listen, I appreciate you giving us a minute here at the front end. We're really excited to talk about our book. We're really excited to talk about all the things we have going on. But everybody that's here knows what's going on in the world right now. There's been some horrible things going on in Afghanistan. We have some significant loss of life. We're very apolitical people, as you know, so there's no politics to any of this. But as military veterans and as men of faith, we feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge what's going on and ask if we could just have a few seconds of prayer for the Afghan people, for our military, for the families of those that were lost today. You know, we hear a lot of people like to quote the scripture from John where it says, you know, no greater love has a man than when he lays down his life for his friend. And I love that verse, but I will tell you, when I think about my teammates that I've lost, I think of Isaiah 6:8, where God said to Isaiah, whom shall I send and who will go for us? And Isaiah said, here am I, send me. And when I think of our military, when I think of my teammates and our fellow veterans and active duty military, that's what I think of. I think of people who said, here am I, send me. So in light of the tragic loss of life today, I would just ask if we could just have a few seconds where we all bow our heads just quietly and say our own prayers for the people of Afghanistan, for our military, and for the families that are struggling with this loss tonight. Amen. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that, Chris. My honor.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. I got to tell you, I had a hard time laying your book down, especially towards the end there. But I didn't read it in the dark after the first night because you have a spiritual warfare element of there that makes it a tad creepy, for lack of a better, politer word. So tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah, sure. Dark Intercept, like you said in the wonderful introduction, is the first book in the Shepherd series. It's a brand new series for us. It has a lot of the same sorts of themes that other Andrews and Wilson stories do. So military characters, mission before self, covert operations, those things are all there. But what makes this series different for us, and something that we're very excited about, is that we're able to incorporate a faith element. So this is our first book with Tyndale House. They're a fantastic Christian publisher, and they've been delightful to work for and supporting us all the way from the very beginning on this series. And there are some things in this series that sort of push the needle. And maybe, like you said, Chris, might make certain people a little bit uncomfortable. But I think that's part of our job as an author team to, you know, make people scratch their head a little bit, maybe get a little bit out of their comfort zone and start thinking about some of the questions while they're being entertained in the story.
I like the way Brian said that feeling of being outside your comfort zone. I know as a reader, I enjoy that. I like getting pushed to that edge that, you were saying, Chris, that feeling of like, I don't want to read this at night, or, that kind of thing. I enjoy that feeling personally, and books like that. But I think people should know that as writers, it pushed us a little outside our comfort zone too, right? Right, Brian? Like there was definitely some risk here for us as storytellers, because, this is not a debut novel for us. It's our debut faith novel, but we've been writing books individually and together for quite a while. We've got 15 books or whatever out, and this is our first time trying to weave those elements in. And so it makes you a little uncomfortable that you see these supernatural things that we hope are, starting some conversations and making people think. But just know it was a little uncomfortable to brainstorm and write too, because we worked really hard to make it exciting. It's a novel, it's fiction, it's meant to be entertainment, but we really wanted to find some Bible-based things that we could use as a foundation so that it could be a conversation starter as well. So a little uncomfortable for us too.
Well, I can't say I'm glad to hear that, but it makes, because I don't want you to be uncomfortable, but I like the thought that it made you think about what you're writing, because then it's intentional. You're not including something just to be sensational about it. So I think that's a pretty cool idea. So how is it to write with two of you? I mean, I've interviewed two authors.
Horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
I mean, this is not an uncommon question that we get.
I imagine.
Yeah. And Jeff typically responds that way.
Okay, good. I'm glad to see that things are going according to plan.
It depends on how much coffee he's had, and I think it's evening now, so he can't drink the coffee. Oh, are you caffeinating at this hour?
I am.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. So I will say, when we first started, we were writing individually, and we each had a couple books on our belt. I think Jeff had written 3, and I had finished up my second. And we were in between projects. I was brainstorming what my next project was going to be. And Jeff and I were already friends. We had met at Thriller Fest, and I'm sure the folks that are listening have probably heard this story. But for us, we both being Navy veterans, we quickly sort of found that, hey, we have a lot of common interests. Not only family interests. We're both fathers. We both have multiple children and both served. But we have the same sort of interest in geopolitics and action stories and just being storytellers. So there was sort of a natural fit, and we started collaborating on Tier 1. That was our first book that we collaborated on together, and after that, we really just sort of realized, hey, you know what, this is a partnership that really works, but also it's a lot of fun. And so that's sort of that fun quotient and the productivity quotient really sort of just drove us to keep writing books together.
Awesome. Now, do you both write? Do you both do the research? How does that work for you guys?
It's weird. It's, we've been on a lot of author panels with other co-authors, because we're not 100% unique. There's some amazing writers, Preston and Child are doing this. JT Ellison and Kathy Coulter have done a bunch of books together. What's interesting is when you get with a bunch of writers, there's not a bunch because there's not that many people doing it, but when you get some writers that co-author together, everybody does it completely differently. And all of them, like, I'm listening to what they're saying they do when they get asked the question. I'm like, that's insane. How could you do that? But I think a lot of it just sort of depends on the relationship of the two writers, what their goals are, what their experience is. In some of these writing teams, you have someone who's, an international best-selling author and a debut author. And it's sort of natural that, one person's going to be mentoring and the other person is going to be, sort of following along, and you have someone in charge. We don't have that model. So our model is, we're military veterans, and we take very seriously the idea of team before self, mission before self. They're buzzwords, but it's a life that we lived for many, many years. And so we decided from the beginning, we wanted to pull that into what we do. We wanted to incorporate that. And so there is literally no ego. It sounds hard to believe, but I swear there's no ego. There's no ownership. we work together to create the best novel we can. And what we found for us, the best way to do that is we do, in fact, write simultaneously, which sounds crazy, especially since we live 1,000 miles apart, right? So when we're actually writing a project, we divide it up and we write individually. So we do write multiple POV, like a lot of writers do. We write in a 3-act structure, like many writers do. And so using that structure, we divide the chapters up by acts in different points of view. So for example, in part 1, maybe I'm writing Jedediah Johnson and he's writing Sarah Beth and someone's writing, this other character. And then in Act 2, we're very intentional about making sure we switch those so that everyone gets a hand and gets intimate with the characters. But I think more important than that is, as we go, every few chapters, 2 things is going on. 1, 4 or 5 times a day, we're on the phone in conversation, brainstorming through what's going on. And 2, every few chapters, we swap those chapters and we rewrite the other person's work so that we're in the space, we're in the head of what's going on. Obviously, you can imagine, since we're not very good outliners, that's really important for, being on the same page so that we don't end up at a different bus stop here as we move on this journey. But so we work exactly simultaneously. We both do the same thing. We both write, we both edit, we both rewrite. We brainstorm together. We're both an intimate part of every step of the book. So it's a little strange when we tell other writers that, they're like, I don't understand. So it works for us. It might not work for everybody.
You know what? If it works for you, that's what matters. And I will tell you, having finished it, it is very seamless. Because sometimes I've had it where I've read books where authors, do a write, and you can tell when one stops and the other one starts. I didn't get that feeling with this book at all. In fact, I kind of forgot 2 of you wrote it, and that to me is good writing. So whatever it is you're doing, it's working. So.
Well, that's a great compliment as co-authors to have you say that. So thank you.
Good. I do have a question from the audience already, and it's an interesting one. Did you guys have any supernatural experiences while writing this book?
I didn't have any supernatural experiences writing this book, but it's a question that Jeff and I talked about when we were brainstorming this book in the very beginning. And for me, the question sort of, if I remember asking you, Jeff, is like, do you feel like you have been in the presence of, of pure evil, a malignant evil, something that's not, we talk about, in nature, you've got a wolf and the wolf hunts a deer, but is that evil or is that nature? And when the kill is over, is a wolf going around just slaughtering deer for pleasure? No, that's not how they behave. And we had that conversation, and there were a couple of times where I felt like in my life that I was in the presence of pure goodness, but also in the presence of pure evil. And I think that that's the conversation that got this started.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. I think that, like Brian, I can't say that during the writing of the book I had any supernatural experience, but we set out early on to tell a book that dealt with issues that a lot of churches don't like to talk about because they're uncomfortable. The real nature of good and evil, the idea of spiritual warfare. I can tell you, having served overseas in some pretty horrible places, that I have, like Brian has described, felt the presence of evil. I've been places and seen things that made it impossible for me not to believe that true evil exists, just like my belief in a loving God is real. And, when you're young, you get it, you hear the scripture and the devil this and the devil that, but that all seems sort of cartoonish, and it's like, the God part, okay, that's easy. But I think a lot of people of faith struggle with the true nature of good and evil. Like, if God is all powerful, why does he just wipe out evil? And then the issues of free will and those sorts of things. And so we had a lot of conversations, didn't we, Brian, about those things, theological conversations. One thing we did from the beginning was, as you pointed out, there is a very heavy supernatural element here, but we wanted to be very biblical in that. And what I mean is, there's not scripture that supports every single thing we did. We went the other way. What we did was we said, we want to make sure that anything that we do, any power that someone has or any event that happens, there's nothing in the Bible that would say, no, that's not how it works, if that makes sense. So there is something to support everything that we see. And in fact, it was so important to us that we enlisted the help of some people close to us. Pastor Chris Bonham, who is a senior executive pastor at a large church in Tampa, was awesome about reading through the manuscript and giving his comments. Another friend of ours who's a Catholic priest, he looked through it. And so we were able to get we got some feedback like, well, this one you might want to change a little bit because it's a little counter to this or that. I am not saying that this is meant to be a theological book. It's not. This is entertainment. It's fun. But by doing it that way, we really wanted to make it something that where people could think about something. It might make them go, huh. I'm not saying they are going to agree or disagree or that they're going to go out and try to figure out what their superpower is. That's not the goal. But if it can make people think about that nature, that duality of good and evil and how it manifests in our world today, not in the Old Testament, but today in the world. And, we said a prayer for Afghanistan earlier. It's hard to look at what's going on over there and not see that there's good and evil forces at play here. And so what does that look like and what does it mean? So that's the theme we tried to pull through. And I think that's what you mean by the supernatural stuff that you've encountered, right, Brian? Like just that presence. I like the way you said it, that being in the presence. I felt that, and it's chilling. And trying to put it into a book was exciting.
And that's interesting that, and I think maybe that's the difference with some of other books I've read where you didn't like force it into a Bible verse. You let the Bible support it, but you built on it because it's fiction. So it's an interesting thought of doing it almost backwards, to what some people think of as faith-based writing is, well, I got this Bible verse and I need to write about it. And you went, no, we're going to use the Bible, but not overwhelmingly so.
Well, we're storytellers, right? I mean, it's a different, and there's some great books that use the model you just described, books that I've read and loved. It's not what we do. Like we weren't setting out to use fiction as a sermon. Rather, we were using the Bible and some of these biblical truths to tell a great story. So it's just sort of a different way of approaching it, I think. Is that a good way to say it, Brian? You agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And Chris, you've had the privilege of getting the early copy. You've gotten to read it. And, one of the things that I wanted to talk about and to this audience is just this idea of, how does a person react or how do you respond to when you have that sort of event? And so Jedediah, he's one of our more complex protagonists that we've written because we really, we thought about him with the beginning in mind. They always say right with the end in mind. We thought about him with the beginning in mind. So for what I mean by that is, Jed experienced an event of pure evil in his past. And, how did he handle that? He handled it by running away. And he didn't think he was running away. He thought he's volunteering to become a Navy SEAL and serve his country. And he did. And he did those things expertly and with great courage. But his true problem, the thing that made him afraid, the thing that challenged his faith, he ran away from that. And I think that, we use a lot of structural metaphors in our stories, and that's one, because, everybody faces things in their daily life that scare them. And we run away, sometimes literally, we move to another city, and sometimes we just sort of ignore the problem. That's kind of running away too. You don't talk to your friend or your spouse or your colleague about something. You run away from confronting that problem. And, the story is about the fact that we force Jed to come back and confront that, whether he wants to or not. And I think the structural metaphor there is that we all have to come back and face those demons at some point, or they're gonna ruin our lives and we're not going to be a better person for it. So that was an important part of this story.
I love Jedediah, by the way, because he was very real for the reasons you just said. He wasn't perfect. He was flawed. He had run away. So I think that's part of why I like the book, because you had a character. Sometimes you read these military books and the main character is unrelatable. They're just better than what you expect. And Jed's not that way, and I like that. So
he's kind of atypical for a hero, isn't he?
yeah,
He doesn't seem that heroic. Like the things he's done are incredibly heroic. 15 years in the SEAL teams and multiple deployments. But I guess the big difference as we think about him is he certainly doesn't see himself as a hero. Yeah. He sees himself as someone struggling with important issues of good and evil and faith and things that he ran away from, relationships and those sorts of things. We do pride ourselves in all of the books we write, the Tier 1 series, Sons of Valor, even the new series we have where we're contributing to Webb Griffin's Presidential Agent series. We always have prided ourselves in trying to write those realistic characters like you're talking about. Like those books where the protagonist is just invincible and the bullets, they're Superman and the bullets are bouncing off and they're like jumping from one airplane to another. And it's fun in a movie and stuff, but you don't really relate to that character, right? And so it's difficult for you to ever rise to that point where you really care that much about them. You think they're cool, but you don't feel intimate with them. And having both served, we always set out. And in fact, before we wrote our first book together, we had a very long conversation about what we wanted to do. And we said, we want to honor the men and women we've served with and paint a picture of them as the heroes we know. And what makes them so heroic, just like Jedediah, and this includes John Dempsey, who is a little larger than life, obviously, in Tier 1, but Chunk Redman in Sons of Valor, our new character in the Webb Griffin series. What makes them so heroic is how ordinary they are, that they are doing extraordinary things, but they're really just like you and me. The only difference between them and us is not that they're bulletproof. It's that they're so driven to do the right thing for whatever their individual motivation is. And those are the people that we served with, the firefighters that run into the burning building, the police officer that runs to the sound of gunshots, the Navy SEAL that fast ropes into a hot landing zone because there's some Rangers down there that need to be helped and extracted. There's a special thing about those people because they're not extraordinary. They're not bulletproof. They could die. They could get hurt. And so that's what we did with Jed. And I do think we took it to a different level with Jed. Do you think, you think maybe Chunk is a little more everyman like Jed is? But Jed's special.
Yeah. And Jed, because we incorporated that supernatural element, he's put in a situation where he feels ill-equipped to handle the challenge that's thrown at him. And that's a little different than our other two series leads. Dempsey's supremely confident in his capabilities, and Chunk is confident in his team. Whereas, Jed's put in a position when this book opens where he's just retiring. He's leaving the Navy. He's leaving his support group and everything that he has come to rely on. And he gets called up by the last person in the world he expects to hear from, his best high school friend who he's been estranged from for 15 years, and says, I need your help to help find my daughter. She's been kidnapped. That is not what Navy SEALs are trained to do. And he even says that I'm a door kicker. I'm not a forensic investigator. What do you need me for? And, David says, I need you because you're my last hope. And so, this is really that point in the story where Jed feels like, I want to say no with every fiber in my being, but I have to do this. And that's really beginning him going on his quest. And Jed, Jeff, wouldn't you say that Jed, that's sort of the beginning of his hero's journey in this story?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you meet him, you see an amazing, an American hero in that he's a military veteran and has served and has been wounded and all that. But he doesn't have that hero's journey until that moment. And I think that you see that in good writing, in good thrillers all the time. There has to be that moment where they go beyond where they want to be for no other reason than it's the right thing to do. Right. I have to save that person. I have to go into that burning building. I have to, because if I don't, who will? And yes, I agree with you. That's sort of Jed's moment. That's when he is heroic. That's the beginning of his journey because he's
and if I don't, can I live with myself?
Right. That's right.
And I don't know if he couldn't probably live with himself, right?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I agree with that, because when you read it, and even his struggle on whether to go or not go, all the way, I had 400 pages to go, so I knew he had to go. But it was going to be a short book otherwise. But that struggle was real, where there was something there, and we find out as a story, and I'm not going to give a spoiler out, but to write him that way, where we would have all struggled with that, because there was something that was catastrophic to that relationship that had ended it. We didn't know what it was, but we knew it was his struggle, and so. Yeah,
we've all been there, whether we're starting a new job or you join the military, you're in boot camp, and you think, what am I doing here? Like I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like an idiot. I'm stumbling around in the dark, and that's sort of how Jed starts his quest. He goes to Nashville, and he's like, I don't know what to do, and I think that is another one of those sort of structural metaphors I mentioned before, where he sort of has to put his faith into, he's lost his faith. So he's like, what do I put my faith in? How do I stumble forward in the dark? And somebody who's spiritually quite strong would be quite comfortable with that, but he's not comfortable with that at all.
And that was another really important theme for us, because, the supernatural elements, the spiritual warfare, good and evil, obviously, for a thriller like this, those are key elements. But one element that was important to us, and what you see in Jed, sort of what we're talking about here, is this idea of crisis in faith, right? And that's something that's, I would argue, universal to some degree or another. I mean, to some it might be much bigger, like for Jed, and for others it might just be a season of doubt or whatever. But all of us have struggled because of this imperfect fallen world we live in, with things that have happened that make us go, why would God let this happen? Those why questions that are so unhealthy. And for Jed, because of his experience, and again, no spoilers, and you have to go all the way to the end to find out, but because of what he experienced, he ran away not just from his hometown and his family, but from his faith, like Brian said. But what's interesting about Jed, and something I relate to in Jed, is he didn't stop believing in God. He just was like, I don't get it, so I'm just not going to think about it, right? And that's something that's very common, I have found, in combat veterans, and not unique to combat veterans. People that have had other traumas experience the exact same thing. It's just where I've had my experience. But when you see things that evil, you see things that horrible, it's hard for you to rectify the idea of a loving God that allows, and I'm air quoting it because we've all read scripture and we know what we're supposed to think, but that allows those things to exist, right? Or allows us to go through these struggles, the idea of fairness, right? And so it's really important to us to put that element in because that's something that everyone struggles with. It's very relatable, but as military men, we feel like it's an important issue for veterans and even active duty military. Usually comes crushing in on you when you're done deploying, because your op tempo allows you to think about it. But it's something that I went through personally. I struggled with those questions. I mean, a lot. I didn't stop believing in God, but I was kind of mad at him. I mean, really mad for a long time. And as a result, I worked through those things. And now as you know, Chris, I have the honor of leading a military ministry for a church in Tampa. And I see these conversations and these struggles in these men, and I know that they're common in other places. And so we wanted to have that thread, and it's not a heavy-handed thread. It's not the point of the story. It's not, even using the word theme is a little strong, but it is a background note for this character that I hope makes him a little bit relatable, because anyone that says they haven't felt that, either they got some living left to do, or else they're not being honest with themselves.
That is probably partly true there, that if they haven't had that crisis of faith, there's something there yet. So I have a couple more questions that kind of wander away from what we've been talking about, which is fantastic. I love taking, not literally taking Jed apart, but delving into him. He's just a fascinating character. I think I could talk to him about him the whole hour. But somebody wanted to know, how did writing this book affect your own relationship with God?
Jeff, why don't you kick that one off?
Sure. I would say that, so you should know that Brian and I talked about this book for a number of years. We brainstormed the idea for this book probably 4 years ago now. Do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Three or 4 years ago. And we brainstormed it. We sample wrote it a little bit. And then we got busy, like life does. You know, Tier 1 took off. We got the Sons of Valor series. Now we get signed up to do this Webb Griffin thing. And it was always a book that was sort of sitting there ready for us, but it just didn't feel like the time is right. And that's another story about how all that evolved. But I think that the point I'm trying to make is that this is something that evolved out of conversations that Brian and I have had as best friends, as military veterans. Brian's been to Tampa. We've been to my church together. Like, these sorts of things, just you have these conversations. And so I would say that writing the book was less a God experience for me than it was an application of a lifetime of God experiences, if that makes sense. But I will say that conversations that Brian and I had in preparation for writing this book, most definitely had an enormous impact on the book because of things they made me think about, whether it's things I needed to confront or just things I hadn't thought about in that way. You know, Brian and I have so much in common, but also there's just enough differences about us that it makes it fun to have a conversation, right? You know, you don't want to talk to yourself in a mirror. And so we come to faith from different ways, from different points, and sharing those experiences, I think, was really exciting, challenged me, made me think about things I believe, you know, and ask some important questions through the books. But I don't think it was as much a massive experience writing it as it was a culmination of experiences leading up, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. That's interesting. Thank you. And Brian?
I love the way Jeff explained that. I think for me, like, you know, every time we write a new novel, it's sort of, you're going along with the character. And if you don't, like Jeff said, if you're not confronting some of those same issues as the character, then, you know, what's the point of it really, right? And how is that character going to be relatable and be genuine and authentic? So for me personally, writing this book, I have to think about all the questions that Jed is asking himself. I have to ask myself those questions too. And I might come to different answers than Jed, or I might come to some of the same answers. The answers that Jed found were a combination of Jeff's and my, you know, brainstorming and discussions, like he said, because we did have a lot of discussions. But what I liked about the experience is that it gets you to think about your faith and your spirituality through the lens of somebody else's problems that might be worse than yours, somebody else's problem, somebody's being tested to a much greater degree than I might be. And I think that's one of the reasons that people gravitate towards reading fiction. If it wasn't for that element, we'd all just read nonfiction, right? But we gravitate to fiction because the characters are faced with very big problems, and we want to see how these heroes respond. Because it gives you a roadmap, it gives you ideas, and maybe inspires you to be a better version of yourself. Because ultimately, we want to read about characters that become better versions of themselves. And that's what I'm trying to do in my life every day, is just be a better version of myself. So I think that's a long-winded way to say, hopefully writing the book and going on this spiritual journey with Jeff and Jed has made me a better version of myself.
You were pretty good. Okay. Before. Yeah, you're a little better. I will say one fun thing, just as a tease for next April, is, you know, this first book, Dark Intercept, is so much fun to write and hopefully fun to read, but it's a huge setup for an entire universe that we've created. And so some of these questions that we're talking about now, you know, differences in theology and how does that affect relationships and, you know, what you believe. What was fun in the subsequent books, especially in book 2, I think, was being able to flesh that out through characters. What we tried very hard to avoid in book 2 is having everyone believe the same thing. We didn't want it to be like a little cult, right? Like we wanted these to be people from diverse backgrounds who had diverse experience and diverse beliefs. And so we actually allow these we flesh out some of those questions through characters having these very conversations. And the conversations Brian and I had, where one character will say, you know, this, that, and well, I don't think that's what that means at all. And, you know, why do you, and so I think we got to do a little bit more of that in book 2, in Dark Angel than we did in Dark Intercept, but this is definitely a big setup for some of those things.
We like to write longitudinal series. And what I mean by that is, you know, the Tier 1 series, one of the greatest, you gave us a great compliment earlier. You said it felt like a single voice through the book. That's one of my favorite compliments. But one of my other favorite compliments is when I see a review after somebody read book 6 in Tier 1, and they say, I'm going back and starting at the beginning because now I realize these guys did a lot of things that I missed, I wasn't aware of. And so we try very hard to it's not a data dump in book 1. We don't just throw everything at you in the buffet. You know, we let you start at the buffet and we let you get partway down the buffet, and then that's the end of that one. You have to wait to, you know, get your plate for the next book. But we do that on purpose because that's how life is. And, you know, if you think about it, you know, I think I said this once before in an interview, but if you had a blind date with somebody, you sat down to have coffee and they started telling you their whole life story, you'd think this person is crazy, right? You'd want to run away as fast as you could. So we take that sort of mentality to the storytelling of our characters aren't going to do that to you, right? You're not going to get to know everything about them and all their relationships right in book 1. So it is really fun, like Jeff said, to get in, especially for us. We know we're going to do this and we know we're going to flesh out more in book 2 and more in book 3. And, you know, a lot of the stuff, we have a reveal on what the big thing that happened to Jed. You find it out. We didn't punish people by making you wait to book 2. You find that out. But what you don't get to find out is all the interpersonal stuff between Rachel and David and Jed and sort of everything that happened after that. And that's not something you're going to get to find out in book 1. And so we're, like Jeff said, we're very excited to come on the journey and you get to learn what these characters, what happened in their lives.
I find that interesting. I do intend to find your other books because this one was so good. Well, quick question first, before I babble on here. How many books are going to be in the series?
As many as people will read.
That's a great answer. I love that answer.
Karen Watson, are you listening?
Let's see what the chat says.
I mean, we don't really, you know, there are definitely books stories that you start that you're like, it's a trilogy. This story is interesting for a trilogy. When you build a universe like this one, though, and, you know, I don't want to spoil too much from book 1 or book 2, but you're going to learn that there's a history of this, of what's going on that dates back way before Jed, hundreds of years, in fact. And so when you build a universe with that level of complexity, the sky's the limit. And so for people like us with attention deficit disorder that like to go off in different directions all the time, that's just a gold mine, right? And so we can, like Brian was saying, we do like to write longitudinally, and we find that that mirrors real life, like he's saying, in relationships, but also in an action thriller. It's a little boring if you meet the bad guy in chapter 2, and because you read the other books, you know he's dead at the end of the book. Like, that's the formula, right? And so we don't do that in any of our books. Sometimes these things, characters come and go, and they, you know, you don't get to wipe out the whole evil plot in the end of book 1, because in real life, you know, you don't go into Afghanistan, get Osama bin Laden, and you come home and there's a ticker tape parade. That's not how it works. So that's a part of it, but it allows us to go in different directions. Like, we can geopolitically go different places, and spiritually go different places, and biblically there's so many things we can do. So as long as people are interested in reading these stories and following this journey, we definitely have enough schizophrenia to keep writing them.
Okay, perfect, I think. Awesome, and I'm very excited by that. But like I said, that was my kind of wander off there, because, well, I can't say that, but the epilogue is not fair. How's that? No more spoilers. We're quiet. We're not gonna say anything more. Okay, so this is a question from the audience. Knowing that this is a book written with a faith-based audience, how do you see this being used by faith-based organizations? That's a good question.
So it is an interesting question, and we had the real blessing of being able to involve some people from Grace Family Church, as I mentioned before, as sort of reading through things. And one of those people is Mike Moore, and Mike is a good friend of mine. He's one of the senior pastors at this very large church, and he's an amazing person. And when he read the book, he wanted to help us, and he did some videos for us and all kinds of fun stuff. But he was fascinated by the story of the book. And he posed the question to us remember when we did the video thing was when he asked.
Yeah.
He said, don't you think that there's a role for this story to start conversations in men's groups or other groups about these issues, about spiritual warfare and stuff like that? And it resonated with us so much, and he and I talked about it so much that he actually helped write a study guide so that this is a fiction action novel. So you've read this book and you hear that and you're like, a study guide, because there's not some big teaching point. But his idea was, if you can get people talking about spiritual warfare or crisis in faith because of this super fun ride they went on, like what if you could design a small group study around the last Jason Bourne movie because there's a theme in there that resonates. People will come to that group because that's fun, right? Yeah. Oh, that movie was great. And so he put together this really neat thing. And we actually are very hopeful that we'll have an opportunity. We actually have one engagement set up already for the fall where we get to meet with a men's ministry and do a question and answer about some of the themes. So I do think there's an element of that. I think for the most part, this book is a typical Andrews and Wilson fun ride with some cool additional elements that we were excited to share. But we really got excited about the idea of being able to share some of these other messages outside the book.
Interesting. Then I'm going to ask, you had mentioned like a study guide. Would that be something you would sell like separately or on your website, or just something you would include in the back of the books?
So we're not sure how it's going to be made available now. My guess is that it's going to be made available to people who request it, who want to do a small group and have those conversations. But it's not something that's to make money. I mean, it's something designed to, provide a support for them. And it's really, study guide isn't even the right term for it. I don't know what they're calling it, but to me, it's really more
conversation starter.
Yeah, a conversation. That's perfect, Brian. It's a conversation starter. It's a way to, Mike puts in a few thoughts on what Jed did and what that means. And hey, how does that make you feel about this idea? And then go and have a conversation at a small table while you're having coffee. It's more that kind of thing, if that makes sense.
And, I think it's not any mystery or it's not news, I guess, that it's hard to get guys to read. We read, but sometimes you're lucky to get a guy to read one book a year, you know what I mean? Because we're busy. And so, we hope that this is the type of book that, you're not reading it because you have to, or because your wife told you have to, or, you're reading it because you want to, because you started, you're like, ooh, like Jeff said, this is like a Jason Bourne movie. That's kind of what we're going for here. And then, like he said, you have conversation afterward, because if you read the book and you don't want to talk about anything, then we didn't do our jobs. I think by the time you finish this book, you'll be wanting to talk about. There's several themes you're going to want to talk about.
Yes, we need the audience to quick go read the book so I can talk to you more about it.
Yes. Hey, audience, you can ping us for more questions.
Ears a minute, would you? We'll come back in 2 weeks to do it all over again when everybody's read it. How's that? So, okay, somebody has a question about your Webb Griffin series. Let's see. Okay, the Webb Griffin series will make 6 separate storylines. How many of your series are you planning to continue? Does that make sense?
The Webb Griffin we're going to be doing the Presidential Agent series. And so Webb Griffin, he had a lot of series, but we're only doing the Presidential Agent series. as far as how that dovetails in with all of our series, yes, we do have quite a few now, but there are two of us. So, I think we can handle it. We're getting a lot of questions right now. Is Tier 1 over? Some people mistakenly think that book 6 was the last one in the Tier 1 series. That's not true. Tier 1 is going to continue. So book 7 is under contract. We're very excited. We're looking for a pub date for that book. And then Sons of Valor was not just a one-off. So we're going to have Sons of Valor 2s coming out the following June. And we have 2 more books planned in this series. Like Jeff said, if you guys keep reading them, we'll keep writing them. So, we're going to continue these series on as long as there's, customer momentum. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I think that with the Griffin series, it is a little different from what we're doing with the other stuff because, obviously it's Griffin. Like he's an iconic, military fiction writer. And so it was a little daunting. We were so flattered to be asked to do it when Penguin approached us. Tom Colgan, who we love, asked if we'd be interested in doing it. But I will tell you, as the person who asked the question pointed out, it's been like almost a decade since the last book in the series. What do you do with that? And there's some people that have the mistaken belief that what we're doing is rebooting that. We're not. What we were challenged to do by Tom and by the estate was to say, what would the next book in the series be? And in some ways, having that 8-year gap was a real blessing because if you had to write the very next book, like what happened 6 months later, and, for something as iconic as that series, that would be very stressful. But because some time has passed, it afforded us the opportunity to bring some new characters in and say, well, what has happened in the last 8 years? There's a new president, of course. There's everything has changed. And so that way we were able to approach it as something that was a little more fresh. And I'm very grateful for that because I think the stress of trying to do the, what happened, 20 minutes later after book 8 would have just killed me. It was stressful enough as it was.
And I'm going to be honest with you, I love Webb Griffin's books. So I'm looking forward to yours. Somebody did ask, and you might have answered this a little bit in your answers there, but I'm going to ask it just because it was an audience member. They asked, what made you leap into the Webb Griffin novels? To me, it sounds like they approached you. Is that true?
Yeah, Tom Colgan, he's managed some amazing authors, the Clancy estate. He found Mark Greaney to write the Clancy books, and then Mark Cameron, and now Don Bentley's writing, so Tom says, he feels like one of his talents is finding the right fit for authors to take over the estate, And so when Webb Griffin passed away, the estate was interested in continuing on the series and the characters. So he came to us, and I presume it's because he read Tier 1 and he liked what he saw. But also I think that, he liked the fact that we had a military pedigree and that this is a story about a military veteran, doing covert operations type stuff. And so, like Jeff said, it was daunting when we started, but the greatest piece of advice that he gave us was he said, I'm not hiring you guys to write like Webb Griffin. I don't want you to be Webb Griffin. I want you to write the best Andrews and Wilson story you can, pay homage to the characters, but nobody can write like Webb Griffin. So don't even try. And so that was quite liberating for us. And that took a little bit of weight off of our shoulders.
A lot of weight. That's interesting that that's why he asked us. I always thought he just got to the bottom of the barrel. He'd already asked everybody else. Everyone else had said no. But I like that. I like that one. I'm going to go with that.
Yeah, we'll go with that. It sounds so much better. I have to admit, though, that after having read this one, because, of course, Karen Watson at Tyndale and stuff, we're sharing all this information. And I had read Griffin's books. So it's like, oh, well, I wasn't sure how that was going to fit. But after having read this one, here's your compliment for the night. I think it's going to be okay. So,
thank you.
But so I do have a couple more. One quick one, and this is probably one of those things, this is a no-no question, but I'm going to ask it anyways, because you're going to have a very simple answer. Will they see you at Thriller Fest in 2022?
I mean,
if it occurs, we'll be there. But right now, Thriller Fest right now is there. We are planning to meet in person. They moved it to end of May, so it's not in July now, but or early June, I think. But yes, if there is one or both of us will be there. Is that okay to say that?
Yeah,
that's okay, right? We're gonna go.
He's my volunteer.
We love Thriller Fest.
We love Thriller Fest. Yeah, it'd be hard to miss it if it was there.
That is one of those interesting ones to go to. It's just fun. And this is going to wander us back to the Shepherd series. And you might have covered this also, but again, they might have missed it if they joined us late. How long did the idea for the Shepherd series percolate in each of your minds before you started talking about it together?
Oh, that's a little bit different, isn't it? Isn't it?
I don't know. I wasn't thinking about it before I met you.
Yeah, and I don't think I was thinking about it until we brainstormed it together. So
it kind of came from that conversation when I said, have you ever been in the presence of pure evil, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. It was like a social conversation we were having because we're business partners, but we're also best friends. So it makes it hard to get work done. But
really hard.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think there was a lot of this book percolating before for either of us. It grew out of a conversation and then it got brainstormed and then it actually got the brakes put on because we were like, what are we doing? We've got a deadline on the book we're working on now. We can't spend 2 days talking about this book we may or may not write. We got to get back to work. And it literally went in the shelf or in the drawer, but we did come back to it every few months. It would come up and we would talk about it and brainstorm a little bit more. So it just sort of simmered in the background until the opportunity presented itself.
But I like the percolate sort of metaphor of that question because that is sort of what we do. And because we're writing multiple series, what's happened is book 7, we haven't started the book 7 in tier 1, but the ideas have been percolating a long time now. And so what'll happen is, like Jeff said, we talk multiple times a day, but a lot of times, you'll be laying in bed trying to fall asleep and I'll start thinking about John Dempsey, and like, what's he doing? Like what's happening, and so these things do percolate. And I've been thinking about the next Webb Griffin book. And, if you care about the characters, you can't help but not wonder what they're up to and what's their next adventure going to be and how they're going to deal with it. So we constantly ping each other back and forth with little things. And like Jeff said, then we'll talk, and then we'll put a pin in that. And we do, but the goalpost has moved a little bit, on that project. And when it is time to start, we're not just starting with the blank page. We've done some development, and that's kind of cool.
Thank goodness, because it's getting harder and harder to keep up. And I will tell you, I know what's going on with John Dempsey right now, and it's horrible. I'm not even going to tell Brian. You won't sleep a wink.
Oh, no.
It is horrible.
Everything's just horrible. Hopefully it gets better.
It's great for us. We're talking about John.
Is it easier to write something when everything is horrible or when everything is better? Which is easier to write?
Like when it personally,
for your character. I'm sorry. I heard that in my head. It sounded much better in my head.
Do I write better when my life is horrible? No. No. Oh, is it easier to write the horrible parts versus I think that I don't really break it down that way. It's such an arc. They're so intertwined. And the way we write, unlike a lot of thriller writers, we do write very character-driven stories rather than assigning characters to the plot. I know that sounds like a subtle difference, but we let the characters drive the story. And so I don't think there's a difference for me. That's a great question, though. Is there a difference for you, Brian, in how you?
Well, what I do know is that I feel a compulsion to make things worse for the character as the story goes on. Because, that's good storytelling. It's not because I'm a sadist.
So, that's good story. So in the tier 1 universe, Brian is the devil.
It's good
I
to
do
know.
feel sorry for that guy sometimes. I really do. Not Brian. John.
You can't make it too easy on him or the book would be boring.
Yeah, that's true.
True. That's very true. So, and then somebody wants to know, and this is a new word for everybody to use for you. Is there anything percolating for Nick Foley?
Oh, that's a sore subject.
Yeah.
Okay.
We wish there was.
Okay.
We love Nick Foley. We love Dash, but we don't see a path forward with those characters right now, at least.
Sometimes certain publishing contracts are out of your control, so this one's out of our hands.
That is very true. So we just got a couple more minutes here, and one of the questions I'm always interested in with because both of you have said you have read, are there certain authors that really influence you or have influenced you in the past?
I mean, Jeff and I both talk about the fact that, you know, in our sort of earlier formative, you know, writer years, we were reading a lot of the same guys. You know, we were reading, we both read Ian Fleming early on, Ludlum, of course, Clancy, of course, Frederick Forsyth I read, you know, and then all just, you know, then later I did Ken Follett, you know, I read his stuff. And then, you know, I started diverging from spy thrillers and stuff and reading, you know, fantasy and science fiction. And there's some amazing storytellers in those two genres. And you can get ideas about plot and voice and conflict and stuff from those genres too. So I know, Jeff, you like to read, or you've been a long time Stephen King fan, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's easier to write when you're broadly read. Mm-hmm. And if you just read, like if you read just in your genre, that's okay. You'll do okay. But if you're reading multi-genre, like Brian was saying, reading some fantasy and science fiction, and we're both, like I mentioned earlier, we're both a little ADHD and off in all kinds of different directions, as you may be able to tell from what we have going
Jeff's
on.
bio.
Right. Right. So, but yes, I grew up reading everything that Brian mentioned. I also grew up reading everything that Stephen King ever wrote. Why do I love Stephen King? I'm not actually a huge horror fan, to be honest. I like the supernatural elements because I think that it's a fun vehicle by which you can challenge your characters. What I love about King is that I just don't think anybody out there can develop a character like him. Like if I could develop characters like he did, if he wrote a book about some 48-year-old dude reading the Yellow Pages, you'd read the book to the end and you'd feel like you were sitting next to that guy reading the Yellow Pages. You wouldn't know why you were doing it because that's not very interesting, but you would feel like you knew that guy. And so I think I get my character development from King. I get some of the, you know, geopolitical action stuff from having grown up reading Ludlum and the Clancy stuff for military. And I devoured a lot of Webb Griffin as a young man. So I think reading broadly as a writer, it really does allow you to bring lots of different pieces into your own kitchen and how you're going to create stuff, if you will.
King, you know, what's interesting about King is that his characters say and do things consistently that you're like, I can't believe he said that. I can't believe she did that, you know, over and over again. And, you know, I don't remember who said it, but I think I heard it even at Thriller Fest. Maybe it was a quote, maybe it was during a talk, but somebody said, you know, a good writer writes characters who say the things we wish we could say and do the things we wish we could do. And I think that King sort of represents that in spades. And I can't tell, like Jeff, I think his characters feel so real because they really do say the things that we all might think, but don't have the guts to say or are too politically correct to say. And so it resonates with us. Those characters make an impact on us.
I like that. That's a good perspective because I love his writing. I can't read all his books because for
the topics.
Yeah, some of them. So I think the more recent stuff is a little easier because it's not quite as horrific. But when you look at the supernatural elements, the way King approaches them, that's how he does it. That's how he gets away with it. His characters are so real to you and they feel so intimate to you that you get to, and then he throws in this crazy thing and you have two choices as a reader. I can either reject that and decide that that character doesn't exist, or I'll accept it so that I can continue to be intimate with his character I feel like I've come to know. And that's how he gets away with some of the most outrageous things that he does. You can't possibly stop reading because that means the character is dead. And I don't want that.
Yeah, I have to admit, I've never stopped reading one of his books completely. I've paused a few times and went, yeah, we're going to read this some other day. But I have to know. I have to know what's happening to that character.
Yes, so, that's right.
Yeah, he is very character driven and very, I don't know. He's probably the best writer I've ever read, just for that reason alone. So, but well, guys, we are going to have to say goodbye. And I'm sorry to say that because this has been fascinating. And I think we could cover many, many other topics this way. So I'm so glad you both could join us tonight. I'm looking forward to the next adventure in our Shepherd series. And I hear it's in April, so which is good. That's too long. Karen, send me a copy now, okay?
I hope I got it right. I hope I haven't just announced to the universe that it's in April and it's not. I should probably look this stuff up. So don't hold us to that if you're listening.
Okay.
It's in the spring.
I won't, but I'll try not to camp out at Tyndale if it's not in April. So, but thank you for joining us. Thank you for bringing us such an interesting book, one that will, I think, start several conversations going. So, and things that will be different. So I'm looking forward to the next one. I'm looking forward to some of your other books that I haven't had a chance to read yet. So that'll be my great pleasure. But thank you. Thank you for joining us. And audience, thank you also for joining us for this time. I look forward to hearing it from you guys. And as you get the books from bakerbookhouse.com, they are on special for 25% off right now. So please take advantage of that. And we hope to talk to you guys soon again. So
thanks for having us, Chris. I had a great time.
And I did too. And I recognized so many names on this chat list. And you know, you guys who are here, it means a lot to us. So thank you for always supporting us. You're the best readers and friends and fans in the world. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And you guys all have a good night, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. God bless.
God bless.